All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to uh, a talk about practical applications of cyber threat intelligence. So we'll start off with some introductions. So my name is Nick Hyatt. I am the practice manager for the Optiv GTIC here. This is actually my second tenure at Optiv. I have many, many years in InfoSec, mostly in incident response, digital forensics, intel work. I do live in Michigan with my better half and 4 cats, and I'm an avid war gamer, so I play Warhammer 40K, Age of Sigmar, things like that. And with me today, I have Emily Lee.
Good afternoon. My name is Emily Lee. I'm one of the intelligence analysts on Optiv's Global Threat Intelligence Center, which we typically just call the GTIC. I've been with Optiv for about a year and a half now, and I have been a military intelligence officer in the Army Reserves for 6 years. My husband and I currently live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and love hiking with our very spoiled rescue pup named Maggie.
Awesome. So today's agenda, what are we talking about? So we're going to start with an intelligence refresher. One of the things that we like to do when we're talking about intelligence concepts is make sure that everybody's on the same playing field. So we'll cover that, and we'll get into how Optiv GTIC develops our strategic intelligence products. And then we'll talk a little bit about effective application of strategic intelligence. There will be some time for questions at the end, so feel free to post those in Discord, post those in the chat, and we'll answer what we can. And when we're doing these talks, we want you to be, in your comfort zone, comfortable, ready to do some intelligence work, just like our friend here on screen. So let's get into an intelligence refresher. And what is intelligence? Here at Optiv, we consider intelligence data that has been analyzed to enable decision making. So it's best when it's detailed, timely, accurate, and complete. And when we're working on intelligence, we break it into 3 categories. We have tactical intelligence, operational intelligence, and strategic intelligence. Examples of tactical intelligence are going to be things that go to your frontline defenders. So curated indicators of compromise, stuff that's targeted at incident responders, threat hunters, SOC analysts, things like that. Operational intelligence is that middle ground between tactical intelligence and strategic intelligence. So it talks about your adversary purpose and intent and whether this attack is targeted or opportunistic. And then strategic intelligence is your large-scale trends, motivations, and classifications, often aimed at and geared towards executives and senior leaders, and drives your technology purchases and security strategy decisions. And we'll talk a little bit about the intelligence lifecycle here. So we start with direction. And when we're dealing with direction, what we want to do is, what question are we trying to answer? And that ties directly into collection. And so this is, where do we get our data from? So whether that's firewall logs, things like that. And that goes down to processing. So once we've collected that data, we start doing data normalization, filtering, things like that, ready to get it all set to work with. And then we go into analysis. And this is where we use our collected and processed data to answer the directed question. So once we've done that, once we've gotten to where we've gotten an answer, we get to dissemination. This is where we share that intelligence with stakeholders in useful formats. And then at the end of the process, we try to get feedback on them. So did we answer that question? And once we have completed that cycle, if we didn't answer the question, we go back to direction and try to make sure we've got the correct question. So as we talk about some of the things that we're going through today, keep this cycle in mind. So let's take a closer look at strategic intelligence. This is a high-level view of trends, motivations, and classifications. It's often forward-looking based on historical evidence, so it's future state as opposed to current state. It can help prepare you for future challenges, and it can drive your security program by comparing that data across a wide spectrum and identifying those current weaknesses that you may have in your security program. So how do we bridge that gap? And what do we mean by comparing data and identifying current weaknesses? So we're talking about vertical-oriented data sets. What is affecting everyone in my vertical? And this is where you can say, let me take a look at that data and see how that affects me. Where does my organization have that coverage? Where do I fall down? Helps prioritize that spend in a limited budget environment. Best practices are a thing, but we all know that actual data helps you succeed more in the real world. So as we start taking a look at these concepts, I'm going to hand it over to Emily, and she's going to talk about strategic intelligence products.
Thanks, Nick, for that refresher on strategic intelligence. Next, I'm excited to talk to you this afternoon about one of the unique strategic intelligence reports that the Optiv GTIC develops. The Optiv GTIC developed the vertical risk reports at the beginning of 2022 to provide Optiv's clients an improved understanding of the cybersecurity risks that face their industry and to provide the other teams within Optiv greater context to support their engagements. We've created 20 vertical risk reports, with the 21st coming out later this quarter, that cover all of the major industries or verticals and several subsectors as well. These documents are risk-based intelligence reports focused on relevant threats and trends to organizations within a specific vertical or business sector. Every organization faces different threats based on its industry, its assets, and its controls. Organizations within the same vertical often face similar threats and trends within the cybersecurity landscape. Therefore, in these reports, we discuss different types of relevant threats, including known and assessed threat actors and adversary groups, software and service vulnerabilities, tactics, techniques, and tools that have been observed or are assessed to be leveraged against each of the verticals. Here you can see the breakdown of the Refinitiv business classification methodology, which is what we based our division of the verticals on. We currently have reports for all 13 of the economic sectors, 4 of the business sectors, 2 industry groups, and 1 activity. Some of the categories within the Refinitiv business classification methodology are very large and contain highly distinct subsectors. For example, the industrials vertical contains both the transportation as well as the professional and commercial services subcategories. So we've created individual reports for each of those to ensure greater relevance and ensure that we accurately capture the threats and trends organizations within those verticals are actually facing. However, like I said, this is not a fixed list. We are adding a hotels and entertainment vertical risk report this quarter, and we added legal services last quarter. Now that you know what the vertical risk reports are and why we developed them, I'd like to dive a little deeper into the sections of the report and how the GTIC utilizes strategic intelligence within them. Although we hope that everyone takes the time to read the entire report, we understand that doesn't always happen. Therefore, we provide a high-level summary of the threats discussed in the report, as well as our overarching assessments on the first 2 to 3 pages of the report. Over the next few slides, you'll see an example of the summary of risks and assessments and the different threats we highlight, as well as some context as to why the threat is relevant to the specific vertical being discussed. This report I'm using as an example covers the financial services vertical, and as you can see, the first threat we highlight is ransomware groups that have been observed targeting the financials vertical. In this case, Lockbit, Alpha, and Royal targeted the greatest number of financial services companies over the last year. And then we provide our assessment that ransomware is not likely to stop being an issue to the industry in this next year, and why. The second portion of our summary highlights advanced persistent threats that have been observed targeting the vertical and some context on geopolitical events that could impact this threat. For example, in the financial services vertical, we discussed several APTs, including Lazarus Group and APT 28, and we discussed the potential implications of China's most recent 5-year plan on this vertical. Next, in the summary, we covered the threats of business email compromise, which I will go into a little bit more later, as well as hacktivism. Although hacktivism is not a particularly large or common threat, a rise in hacktivist activity has been observed since the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and is worth mentioning as a potential risk to some of the verticals. Finally, we discussed the risk of supply chain compromise through third-party vendors and partners such as technology companies and law firms. Before diving deeper into the reports, I'd like to touch on our team's methods of research and analysis. As Nick discussed earlier, the intelligence lifecycle drives our processes. First, we identify the questions our intelligence products seek to answer. Then the analysts on our team use a combination of sources in addition to our own personal experience and knowledge to form the basis of our reports and inform our analysis. The GTIC monitors threat actor behavior through open source reporting, often utilizing our threat DNA emails as an easy way to aggregate vertical specific trends. Additionally, we use several proprietary services to search trends by malware type, target vertical, location, threat level, and activity date. Our team also monitors 53 different data leak sites and tracks that activity by volume of attack, geographical location, and vertical. Additionally, the GTIC monitors current geopolitical events and incorporates their potential effect onto the cybersecurity landscape. The GTIC analysts then leverage professional experience and intelligence fundamentals to deliver reasonable and relevant statements and assessments. Although intelligence estimates are inherently subjective, we provide examples and research to illustrate the conclusions we have drawn and yet still allow for variances of opinion. As I mentioned above, our team monitors 53 different data leak sites and tracks that activity by volume of attacks, geographical location, and vertical. We update these charts quarterly, allowing us to quickly identify what verticals are receiving increased or decreased attention and identify ransomware groups with spiking activity levels. These charts cover the last 12 months, so you can see that over the last 12 months, Lockbit has been the most active ransomware group, and the industrials vertical has been by far the most targeted vertical. This data feeds the first section of the main body of the report, which discusses the threat cybercriminals pose to a vertical, particularly through ransomware. In this section, we analyze the data provided through the monitoring of data leak sites and discuss the most active ransomware groups within the vertical, as well as commonly observed tactics, techniques, procedures, and tools used by threat actors while targeting a particular vertical. The next part of the report dives deeper into the threat of business email compromise, which has been reported as the costliest cyber threat over the last several years by the FBI. In fact, in 2022, over $2.7 billion of losses were attributed to business email compromise incidents. This represented a 12.5% increase from 2021. Although we provide vertical-specific examples across each of the reports, this threat is more uniform from one vertical to another. Next, we move into our analysis of state-sponsored advanced persistent threats that form a risk to organizations within a specific vertical. Although APTs and state-sponsored cyber attacks are often the flashier and more news-catching activities, most of these attacks share tools and techniques which frequently overlap with other APTs as well as with general cybercriminal activity. Therefore, although we provide examples of state-sponsored activity within each of the vertical risk reports, we minimize the importance of attribution and focus more emphasis on the tactics, techniques, procedures, and tools used within the attacks. One of the tools that Optiv's GTIC uses in its strategic intelligence products to assess threat actors is the threat actor metric. The threat actor metric is a multifaceted qualitative approach to determine an adversary or campaign's potential risk to an organization or industry. The metric considers known and assessed non-technical capabilities and intentions. This provides an added layer of depth to risk-based intelligence analysis and supports proactive and remediating recommendations. On the screen, you can see the current assessment of Lazarus Group, a well-known North Korean state-sponsored threat group that targets many verticals for both financial and cyber espionage purposes. The group is assessed at a score of 70 out of 100 based on the factors that you can see on the screen here of acquisition, adaptability, focus, duration, motivation, and objective. We utilize these metrics for not only advanced persistent threat groups, but ransomware gangs and other threat actors as well. If you are interested in learning more about these metrics, please check out our team's principal consultant, Emil Karimi's talk titled Reapplying Risk and Fundamentals Back into Intelligence. Continuing with our use of the financial services vertical risk report as an example, in addition to the threat actor metric, we provide a brief description of Lazarus Group and several examples of their targeting of financial organizations in the last few years, such as the Trader campaign, targeting blockchain and cryptocurrency companies last year that CISA and the Treasury Department disclosed. We address several other risks in these reports. However, one that I want to highlight is the software and vulnerability risks. In each of the vertical risk reports, we include a separate analytical piece that the Optiv GTIC put together, covering the most common software and vulnerability risks. This section is not specific to a certain vertical, but instead was put together from over 2 years worth of data, which we continuously collect from the incident response team's engagements, as well as external industry reporting that the GTIC observed, collected, and analyzed to provide a list of the most commonly targeted and exploited software and services that organizations should prioritize in terms of patch management, hardening, asset inventory, and visibility. These products and services are known to be targeted by all types of cyber adversaries, including hacktivists, cyber criminals, and state-sponsored entities. We divide this list into several categories of products, including critical enterprise software, content management system sites, software development and code repositories, VPN and proxy clients, NAS devices, remote access and IT management, protocols and services, browsers, routers, and we've actually just added cloud services to this list as well. Finally, our last content-based section of these strategic intelligence documents is the MITRE attack listing, in which tactics and techniques commonly observed and reported during adversary attacks against the vertical in question are listed. The MITRE attack framework is a bit too hefty for one PowerPoint slide, but within each report, we do have a full vertical specific breakdown of the tactics and techniques that are commonly observed within attacks on a specific vertical, as well as a description of each of those tactics and techniques. But this concludes the information I have for you about the Optiv GTIC's creation and use of the vertical risk reports as a strategic intelligence document. I hope that you found this information useful as an example of how CTI programs can make strategic intelligence relevant to security teams. I will now pass it over to Nick, who will provide a little more information on the broader use of strategic intelligence in the cybersecurity field.
Thanks, Emily. That was really interesting and very useful for explaining how we actually do strategic intelligence here at Optiv. So let's tie it all together. And at the end of this talk, hopefully with the information that Emily's given you and the concepts that I'm going to talk about, you're going to be all wrapped up in a warm, fuzzy blanket of security and be ready to go, just like our friend on screen here. Now, this is great and all, but what do I do with it? There's a lot of strategic intelligence out there. So not all of it is applicable and not all of it is useful. That doesn't diminish the content, but it does require a sensible approach to implementation. I'll be the first to admit that some of this is built in a vacuum. When you're dealing with intelligence concepts, if you're not actually out there in the environment looking at how the intelligence is relevant, then it's very hard to make that assumption of this is going to be useful or not. So when you're consuming this intelligence, you have to come at it with an open mind and really filter down and address what is going to be most useful for you. So you've got what we call the two towers here. There are two approaches to implementing intelligence. What do I need to solve now? And what do I need to solve tomorrow? And now is usually the domain of tactical and operational level intelligence. So your day-to-day work dealing with incident response, things like that. Strategic intelligence, the stuff we're talking about here today, shines in solving for tomorrow, as especially represented by some of the data that was presented in Emily's portion of this talk. So let's take an example here. Acme Corp is determining their security strategy for the next 3 years. Senior leadership says we need to focus on problem X. SOC personnel say, well, problem Y is something that we need to look at. We need help to solve it. So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Senior leadership provides the budget, but their priorities conflict with the reality of what SOC operators deal with day to day. So this is where strategic intelligence comes into play. This allows you to have that data-driven decision making. So you can use that strategic intelligence, not just Optiv's, although we do prefer if you include ours in your processes, you can make that data-driven choice. So what does that data, both the internal trends and the external intelligence, say? So let's make the workflow here. So your internal trends are your phishing emails are an ongoing threat. And you're gleaning this from your email protection application, your dashboards, things like that. Your strategic intelligence says phishing emails are an initial access vector for a lot of threat actor groups. So the logical conclusion from this is that this is a justification in enhancing that email protection. So whether that be a solution purchase, a policy change, awareness training, things like that. This is what you can do with that data-driven decision-making by using strategic intelligence. So let's talk a little bit more about those internal trends. How do we harness what we have? And this is where you want to understand the capabilities of your tools. Many tools that are in play today provide dashboards with statistics. If we think back to our Intel refresher, we can use the analysis phase to make this data work for us. These statistics, once they're compiled, paint a picture of what's trending in your environment, and it's just one piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle is that external intelligence. Those external intelligence teams have access to wider data sets. They also have more time to analyze the data. The caveat here is that a lot of that analysis, a lot of that access that they have to that wider data is done in a vacuum. So if you ingest that intelligence into your environment alongside your own internal intelligence, you can put those two puzzle pieces together. And that way you have the surface level view, they have the 30,000 foot view, and you can meet in the middle and get that useful data-driven intelligence. So there are a few things to watch out for here. Number one, confirmation bias. If you have a particular thorn in your side that you're trying to solve, you can find trends where they don't exist. So do be aware of those sorts of things. Good intelligence takes time. So when you're generating your trends, the more data you have, the better. You want to balance that data collection with the realities of decision making. And then you're going to run into unique situations. You may have a very specific need that isn't addressed by intelligence vendors. So you'll be relying on your own trends and data here. Trying to adapt that intelligence from other verticals may not be as efficient. And then fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD. That hype is real in the security industry. Remember, you want to trust, but verify where all of this is coming from. So to summarize, what we want to communicate today is that strategic intelligence is a useful tool for determining that overall security strategy. A combination of internal and external intelligence combines to provide a useful picture of where you stand, and data illustrates strengths and weaknesses in a presentable format. It allows for saying we should do X because of Y, rather than I think we should do X because Y was in the headlines. Again, that data-driven strategic intelligence answer for how to do things. So thank you very much. We appreciate your attention today, and hopefully you found some value in this.